When someone enters your physical space in a virtual space, there's the same physiological and psychological reactions.
It was one of the rare moments when I thought, oh my God, that exactly starts to show how important digital assets are going to be.
Our online relationships are really interchangeable with our offline relationships because nothing is ever really exclusively online anymore.
How can we use Metaverse in order to nurture more connection with your consciousness, nurture better mental health?
This is one of the questions our experts will answer in this final episode of Campaign's Metaverse video series. We already talked about the basics of the Metaverse, as well as marketing, representation, brand safety, and global accessibility in the medium. At its full realization, the Metaverse holds the power to shape the way we think of ourselves, of others, and the world at large, for better or worse. This will be especially impactful for generations that have grown up with access to digital technology. For example, according to a study by Vice Media Group, 52% of Gen Z gamers feel more like themselves in the Metaverse than in real life. As a Gen Zer myself, I came into this project skeptical about how the Metaverse would address the mental health of its users. If my online identity starts to define me more than my physical presence, what are the implications of that? How can issues present on social media such as bullying and scamming be avoided in this space? And most importantly, how can we address the topic of mental health in the decentralized space? To answer these questions, I invited
Dr. Rachel Cowart. I am a research psychologist, and I'm the research director for Take This, which is a mental health nonprofit that serves the gaming industry and gaming community.
Diana Caverly, and I'm the Global Chief Strategy Officer of MRM. I grew up in Romania as a little girl, so I have been pretty much a gamer since Mortal Kombat 2.
Our starting point is the impact of the Metaverse on the mental health. What are the goods? And what are the evils?
I think that we need to start thinking about the metaverse as an extension of just another space in which we live our lives. And what we know about media, technology, what we know about social relationships and how these work both off and online is how we can start thinking about how the metaverse is going to impact our mental health.
There are all sorts of possible dangers, right? Including the fact that we have a high percentage of kids and teens into the metaverse. We have a high percentage of women that we want there. And just like with any other world, things like privacy, things like bullying or harassment are pretty much inherent to the space.
So if we think about things like cyberbullying and we have greater physical and behavioral fidelity in the metaverse, these impacts are probably going to be more intense and more negative than we're already seeing. So we have to think about how can we mitigate the negative behaviors and actions that we know happen on the internet. And we have a lot of research as to give us some ideas to why that happens. So we might be more informed now.
At the same time, I am an idealist. So I believe that it's equally important. What are the actual benefits for mental health that we can create?
For instance, we know that online gaming spaces are great for friendship development and friendship maintenance. And these spaces transferred into a space with higher behavioral fidelity, which is how you would describe the metaverse, would have similar and perhaps enhanced positive social effects.
Virtual reality seems to be helping veterans who have PTSD because it gives the possibility to recreate some of the traumatic events in their lives, but in a way that doesn't make them just relieve the trauma as much as it actually helps them control that environment and rewrite that history for themselves.
Because of the fact that it is so immersive, it is possible to have even a wider range of positive social benefits. For instance, physical proximity is often something we talk about in relation to engaging online. I can talk to you on Zoom and it's great, but I don't have the sense that you're next to me. But in the metaverse, you can add that extra layer. You can add the sense that somebody's next to you. And even though it's a digital projection and they're not actually next to you, the psychological manifestation of that is very similar. And we see that in the research in terms of how we are interpreting these interactions in these fully immersive spaces.
The metaverse allows you to break boundaries and explore and expand your creativity and your building aspects. When I talk to my kids, I tell them that when I was growing up, essentially all of our games, so to say, growing up were had a very definitive target. You had to win a race, you had to eliminate your enemy, etc. What I'm fascinated about some of the games that they're growing up with, and I'm playing alongside them, there are more coming from a metaverse perspective, things like Roblox, like Animal Crossing, Fortnite, etc., is that they are games that from the get-go encourage creativity and encourage state of building and encourage a state of like hanging out together. Like throughout COVID, I could see how things like Roblox was kind of like a lifeline for the kids.
Do you have any interesting examples of how brands are addressing mental health in the metaverse?
I think it's really interesting that brands are talking about mental health in the metaverse. Meta, Microsoft, Nvidia, there have been actual pushes towards discussing this now, which has been amazing because, when you think about when the internet was developed or when social media was developed or when all these new things are developed, mental health, I feel like was never at the center of these discussions.
I like and applaud initiatives that I think, even if they're not tackling mental health directly, are starting to scratch the surface of that. I have been admiring the work that Nike has been doing in this space quite a lot, all the way from creating Nike World and so on to the more recent activations such as Airtopia for Air Max anniversary. The fact that they created a world in which literally sports have no boundaries and kids can actually play and feel like they're actually engaged in a sports activity that once again doesn't constrain you, doesn't depend on your weight or height or like whatever else. I think that's a powerful inclusive play that will expand the meaning of like sports in the metaverse as well, beyond what we know today as physical activity and sports.
There have already been examples of bullying and harassment within the metaverse experience spaces. So how can this be addressed and what roles can brands possibly play?
Public service campaigns are the singular greatest thing that can be done. And I have an example, Raising Good Gamers, which is an initiative from Games for Change, paired with the Cartoon Network last year, and they did a public service campaign about cyberbullying. And they made a series of short PSAs that aired on television, and it also had corresponding materials on the Cartoon Network website. So I think there was like a printout, and it was about how to be a good digital citizen, basically, like what to do if you experience something that makes you feel uncomfortable, how you should behave if somebody is acting in a way in which makes you feel uncomfortable. And I think the reason it was successful is because Cartoon Network is a very well-trusted brand. Parents are already, have their eyeballs on Cartoon Network. That's where you can get them. Raising Good Gamers as part of Games for Change has an incredibly good reputation in the industry. Pairing them together, you're getting subject matter expertise with parental eyeballs and trust together. And it was so successful. And I would love to see more of that with brands pairing with subject matter experts, whether, with gaming, it could be Raising Good Gamers, it could be Take This, it could be the Fair Play Alliance, those kinds of groups, and pairing with them to get this information, this expertise level of information out about safe ways to use the metaverse, or how the metaverse can be good for mental health, or how the metaverse could be bad for mental health, and what parents could look out for. It's such an incredible tool that's not being leveraged enough.
As you mentioned, you have two girls. Have they ever had any experiences, negative or positive, that stood out to you?
One of the most interesting and kind of like revelatory experiences for me was actually happened at Christmas a couple of years ago. It was still early days of Roblox. And I remember we wake up Christmas morning and our oldest comes and she's like crying with big tears because she had been scammed of like some very important digital clothing items that she had been building and saving Robux forever and so on, and she couldn't believe it. And it was one of the rare moments when I thought, oh my God, that exactly starts to show how important digital assets are going to be as well. But it also was a moment zero of us kind of like taking a step back and starting to actively talk about scamming and about the possibility of all of it happening, but also about how to deal with it emotionally as well as, physically. What are the means in which you can protect yourself and should protect yourself from from scams moving forward and so on. And I think that's one of the reasons why I keep on like talking all the time about, no, let's do education, let's have open conversations, and let's equip pretty much everybody with the means and tools necessary for having these conversations.
What are social etiquette and personal rights that people and brands must consider when engaging in the metaverse?
When we think about the way the metaverse is going to change how we interact online, it's the physical presence of another person in the space that is perhaps the biggest change and the biggest jump from how we experience the internet and networking with people online now.
People might not understand what a personal space means in the metaverse, so it's important to create awareness about that.
As I mentioned before, when someone enters your physical space in a virtual space, there's the same physiological and psychological reaction. So there's been some discussions of this in the research community already about how do you overcome this pitfall, like physical assault in the metaverse. They're not actually physically assaulting you because they're not touching you, but the psychological reaction of somebody being in your space is the same. And there has already been some kind of novel interventions. For instance, I know that some people have enlisted a personal bubble. So you can put a little bubble around your avatar in the metaverse, and when someone gets within a certain range, they just kind of disappear, so you don't see them. So I think we have to start thinking about new and novel ways to protect people physically in this space.
In what ways can developers and brands design safe and positive experience for consumers, overcoming some of Web2 issues around addiction and social validation?
Yeah, it's about building it that way from the bottom up and not trying to fix it after, because that's the problem that we saw. You can learn from the games industry very well. You can learn from them about trying to fix it later, because games were games first and social networks later. So it wasn't really prepared about how to best address negative behaviors like hate and harassment. And then it very much became kind of like a Band-Aid situation, which is never effective.
I hope that developers today are looking at the interaction between these technologies and very specific groups of people. Kids in particular, women, like I said, minorities, people that have different accents and so on. I think having the empathy to understand different types of users is literally the number one step in being able to control how to design for them.
To think about creating collaborative spaces, or we have to think about creating spaces where if something goes wrong, there's an easy way out of that space. You know, we have to consult with people who have done this before. We know so much more now than we knew before about how to create the space from the bottom up, because behavior is a function of a person in their environment. So if you want the environment to be pro-social, you have to create the environment in which to foster that.